Their hearts were bound only to their power. Their bodies shared with hundreds of concubines in the harem. Marriage was forbidden. Slave girl, captured and brought to the palace, would break the empire's most sacred rule and force the most powerful man in the world to choose between his throne and his heart. This is the story of the night Hurrem Sultan changed Ottoman history forever. The Ottoman dynasty had a rule that was older than the empire itself. A sultan must never marry. Concubines were there to give him children, to secure the future of the dynasty, but they were never, ever wives. Why? Because marriage created powerful in-laws and rival families. And rivals in the cutthroat world of the Ottoman court always created war. This system had worked for hundreds of years, keeping the Sultan's power absolute and undivided. But Hurrem was no ordinary concubine. Known to the Europeans as Roxolana, she was captured from her homeland and brought to the imperial harem. But where others saw a prison, she saw an opportunity. She was intelligent, fearless, and dangerously ambitious. She had already achieved what many thought was impossible. She had truly captured the Sultan's heart, becoming his undisputed favorite. But for Hurrem, that wasn't enough. She wanted something more, something no woman had ever dared to ask for. The rumors started quietly, like whispers in the palace's shadowed corridors. Servants murmured that Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent no longer visited any woman but Hurrem. Ministers in the imperial council exchanged nervous glances. Even the valid sultan, Suleiman's own mother and the most powerful woman in the empire, grew concerned. She warned her son, a ruler does not belong to one woman, belongs to the empire. But Suleiman was no longer listening to his mother, his advisors, or centuries of tradition. He was consumed by a feeling a sultan was never supposed to have. In secret, he poured his heart out in poetry, writing verse after verse dedicated to Hurrem. He called her my joy, my life, my world. For the first time in the history of the mighty Ottoman Empire, a sultan was deeply and truly in love. And this love would demand a revolution. In the spring of 1534, the Topkapi Palace buzzed with a secret energy. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Suleiman had made a decision that would not just shake the empire, but shatter its foundations. He was going to marry Hurrem Sultan legally, officially, before God and the court. This was an act so radical, so unthinkable, that it had to be done in the deepest secrecy. The wedding took place not with grand public celebration, but hidden away inside the private world of the imperial harem. There were no banners flying from the palace walls, no parades through the streets of Istanbul. There was only the soft glow of candlelight, a heavy silence, and the palpable fear of what was to come. Hurrem stood before the most powerful man on earth. She wore a gown of crimson silk, her eyes steady, her spirit unbroken by years of struggle in the harem. She had survived rivalries, plots, and the scorn of the court. Now she was at the precipice of history. When Suleiman took her hand and recited the sacred wedding vows, a 500-year-old rule of empire shattered into a million pieces. On that fateful night, the Ottoman world changed forever. When morning came, the secret was out, and the palace erupted into chaos. The grand viziers, the highest officials of the state, called it madness. The religious scholars, the guardians of law and tradition, called it heresy. The janissaries, the elite soldiers of the empire, saw it as a sign of weakness. No sultan had ever taken a wife. To them, Hurrem was a witch, a foreign slave who had used some dark magic to ensnare the ruler of the world. But to Suleiman, she was something far greater. She was his partner, his intellectual equal, his queen. To formalize her new, unprecedented status, he issued a royal decree. Hurrem was to be known as Hurrem Sultan, the favorite of the Sultan. It was the first time in Ottoman history that a woman who was not of royal blood was granted a formal, powerful title. She was no longer just a concubine. She was a recognized part of the imperial power structure. The court, however, was not ready to accept this new reality. The established order turned against her with a vengeance. Anonymous letters flooded the palace, warning Suleiman of divine punishment and the downfall of his empire. Powerful enemies, who saw their own influence threatened by Hurrem's rise, plotted her downfall in the shadows. Even the valid sultan, her own mother-in-law, who had once held absolute power over the harem, distanced herself, unable to support such a break with tradition. But Hurrem was a survivor. She had fought her way up from nothing, and she wasn't about to lose it all now. She fought back not with poison or daggers, but with the same weapon she had always used, her brilliant mind and political savvy. She understood that to secure her power, she needed to win over the people. She began a massive campaign of public charity, donating her considerable wealth to the poor, funding the construction of mosques and public kitchens to feed the hungry. To the common people of Istanbul, she became a symbol of piety and generosity. And to the plotting court, she was suddenly untouchable. How could they move against a woman so beloved by the public? Right beside her through it all stood Sultan Suleiman, unyielding and more in love than ever. His support was her ultimate shield. The years following the wedding marked the absolute height of Hurrem's power. No longer just a wife, she became Suleiman's closest political advisor. She built her own magnificent charitable complex in the heart of Istanbul, masterpiece of Ottoman architecture that included schools, a hospital, bathhouses, and a grand mosque that still bears her name today. Her influence reached far beyond the empire's borders. Foreign ambassadors stationed in Istanbul wrote frantic letters back to their kings, describing her as the Sultan's shadow, a woman whose opinion could shape imperial policy. Even the powerful courts of Europe began to fear her influence, recognizing that to deal with the Ottoman Empire now meant dealing with Hurrem Sultan. Inside the empire, she had achieved what no woman had ever even dreamed of. She had turned love into power, and that power was now shaping an empire. Hurrem's marriage did more than just break a rule. It tore the royal family apart. It destroyed ancient customs and planted seeds of jealousy and resentment that would one day bloom into open war. Her rivals in the court never forgave her for her unprecedented rise. The consequences would echo for generations. The bitter rivalry between her sons for the throne would eventually lead to fratricide, plunging the empire into a bloody civil conflict. The Sultanate of Women, an era where imperial women held immense political power, had begun. But it was a period born of conflict, and some historians argue it contributed to the long, slow decline of the empire. It all began on that night, the night a sultan chose love over law. In the grand sweep of history, there are moments that rewrite destiny. For the Ottoman Empire, that moment came on one forbidden night, shrouded in secrecy and candlelight. It was the night a slave girl became a queen, and the empire's heart, for the first time, began to beat for her alone. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.